We're ready.
Okay, so to start, just as a kind of like a brief introduction to yourself, if you could introduce yourself and kind of your current either research projects or position in that way.
I'm Jacquelyn Grant. I am the Fuller E. Calloway Professor of Systematic Theology, and I am also Director of Black Women in Church and Society here at the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, Georgia.
So to start off, a lot of the kind of questions we're going to be asking will be things around kind of early experiences or early memories. And so what are kind of your earliest memories for you about your identity, either as gender, race, sexuality, kind of your forming memories that you might have thinking back?
Well, I grew up in this, yes, to repeat the questions.
Oh, you're fine. You can just go right in. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And you will be editing some of this out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And Ashley's voice won't likely be in it.
Yeah, so
Right.
feel free to ask questions.
Okay.
So.
All
Yeah.
right.
So starting with growing up in, I think you were going to say in the South is a great
Yeah.
place to start.
I grew up in the South, in the deep South, South Carolina, on the coast, in a small town, historic town, Georgetown, South Carolina. It's about 1 hour north of Charleston and 36 miles south of Myrtle Beach. In the deep South, of course, one of the things that you are constantly faced with is the matter of segregation. Having been born in the latter 40s and growing up in the 50s, you experienced what it means to be a black girl in the South, as you related to the white world. But I also grew up in the context of a pastor's home. My father was a pastor in the African Methodist Episcopal Church for 39 plus years. Well, he served as pastor for 39 years and as minister for 40-some years. And so my young days were spent in the church. My father always pastored in the rural areas of South Carolina, and so his churches were always 20 miles away, 30 miles away from home, close enough so that we did not have to move from one parsonage to another. We always lived in our own home in Georgetown. But what it meant is that we were in church all the time. On Sundays we would leave 8:30 in the morning, and some Sundays we would be returning 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Wow.
I've been in, in one day, on one Sunday, I've been in as many as 5 different worship services in 4 different churches on that one day. And so my time was spent, much of my time was spent in the church. I also was one of the children that was given the opportunity to take piano lessons. And so what that meant was that I also became organist and pianist in my home church, Arnett AME Church in Georgetown, South Carolina. And then when my father started pastoring, I became the musician for his churches. So which meant that even when my siblings would sometimes every now and then get a rest and not have to go with my father, well, I had to go every Sunday because I was the musician for his choir. So I've spent a good bit of my time in church and a good bit of my time with my father, the preacher, pastor, And so I was very much influenced by living with and following in the steps of my father, the pastor and preacher. So I spent so much time in the church. Folks, would wonder, well, why did I stay in the church? You want to think that I had enough of it? No. I was being taught by it. I was being socialized by it. I was being educated by it, and so it became a part of me. It became a part of what it meant to be Jacquelyn Grant, what it meant to be a part of the Grant family, with the Reverend Joseph James and Mrs. Lily Mae Grant as leaders of this family. When I left Georgetown, I went north. I wanted to go north. So I left South Carolina and went to North Carolina to go to school, Bennett College, and carrying that tradition with me. I guess I ended up. I took a major in French because I wanted to learn French and do some things in French-speaking country. Wanted to be interpreter of the UN, that kind of thing. Then I did a minor in music, continuing my study of music, piano and organ. But it was also in college where I continued my religious training as well. I worked in the office of the chaplain at Bennett College, Reverend Peter Adotier Adu, a chaplain and from Ghana, West Africa. And so I continued my religious training even as I was in my college years. It was at Bennett College that I began what we called Students for Christian Social Concern. Students for Christian Social Concerns, SCSC. And in that organization, we developed. Bennett College is a Bennett College for women. It's one of the two black colleges for women in the United States. Bennett College and Spelman College here in Atlanta. Bennett College, located in Greensboro, North Carolina. And so I started this organization, SCSC. And we did community service ministries. We'd go to the hospital and tend to some of the needs of patients, take them to chapel on Sunday morning, do other kind of volunteer things that they needed that we could do. We developed a big sister program in the community. Bennett College at that point was located in well, there's no better way to describe it than just the word ghetto. It was in the ghetto, but we were in our four walls, and so we were away from the ghetto in that regard. But this big sister program we just started, it was directed toward the surrounding community, and we went into the community and we identified young girls who needed a big sister. And provided, different images for them and giving them ideas that you're not limited by your environment, but you can, move out of that environment and improve your life. And so we did those kinds of community service ministries. Mm-hmm. It was during my junior year. It was during my junior year that I began to move toward work in the church as my profession. Interestingly, during that junior year, we visited, I had the opportunity to visit the Conference on Ministries that different seminaries were having across the country. I came to the Conference on Ministry here at ITC. I went to the conference on ministry at the Divinity School at Chicago University. I went to the conference on ministry at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, Indiana. And so I got a good view of what I was contemplating and what I was about to the new direction, not really a new direction, but the direction that my life was taking. I went to two of those conferences on ministry again in my senior year when I was a senior at Bennett College. Well, when I went to them, I liked all of them. I wasn't particular about Chicago, but CTS in Indianapolis, I can handle that. But I really wanted to come to Atlanta, ITC in Atlanta. Well, interestingly, after I graduated from Bennett College in May, in June, I went to spend some time in France with the International Experiment Living Program operating out of Vermont. And so I spent 6 weeks in France. And I think I learned more French there during that 6 weeks than I learned during the entire time in college when I was studying it. But I had the opportunity to live with a family, and so a family that did not speak English, and so I had to speak French. And so that was a very good experience. But while I was there, I kept writing my mother, have I heard from, have I been accepted at ITC? She kept writing me back, no, we haven't heard anything. And so I returned from France 1 week, and that next week I was due to leave. I had already been accepted I decided I didn't want to go to Chicago. I had already been accepted at Christian Theological Seminary. And so I was headed to get on a bus to go to Indianapolis. But I was moping around the house so much, and my mother asked me, well, what's wrong? I want to go to ITC. I want to go to Atlanta. And she said, well, go on and call them and see. Now, you know, this is back in the 70s, making a long distance call. That was a big thing, you know. So I picked up the phone and called ITC, and they said, well, you've been accepted. You haven't gotten a letter yet? I said, no, I haven't received anything. Well, you've been accepted. Okay, all right, thank you. So I went to the bus station and got a ticket for Atlanta rather than for Indianapolis. And so Atlanta I came to do my Master's of Divinity degree. But interestingly, I often tell the story, you know, I actually came to seminary with the traditional women's notion initially. I was interested in doing Christian education because I was interested in, this was during the height of the Black Power Civil Rights Movement, and I was interested in doing relevant literature in the church, a literature in the church that's relevant for Black folks. Because much of the literature, certainly literature coming out of out of the white publishing houses, did not acknowledge the presence, the humanity of Black folks. I remember taking one class, and the teacher told this story. He said he was reading a Sunday school book, and a chapter, and you know, after the chapter there are questions for discussion. He said the first question was, what would you do if a black person were to walk into this room right now, well, if you were in a black church, you keep teaching, keep talking, keep reading, keep doing what you're doing. Well, he said, obviously, this Sunday school book was not written for black folks. It was not written for the black church. What we need in the black church is relevant material, material that's relevant for the African American church. And so that's what I saw myself doing, studying Christian education in order to produce better literature for the African American church. Well, when I got to seminary, it became clear to me as I studied the disciplines the first semester, it became clear to me that Christian education was really not the problem. Christian education was merely a symptom of the problem. As I studied theology, took the introduction to theology with Dr. John Diamond, and took other theology courses, it became clear to me that if you have bad theology, you're going to have bad Christian education literature. If you have irrelevant theology, you're going to have irrelevant Christian education literature. If you have white theology, you're going to have a Christian ed program that caters to whites. And so it became clear to me that, since Christian education is really not the problem, it's a symptom, I need to deal with that discipline that's foundational to the problem. And so it is then that I switched from Christian education to theology. And I studied then, continued my pursuit in theology here while I was at ITC. Studied black theology. There were major black theologians that had come through here. Dr. Cecil Cone, brother of Dr. James Cone, was here, dean of Turner Theological Seminary, the AME Seminary here. Dr. Henry Young, noted process theologian, black process theologian, came here while I was here. Dr. Thomas Hoyt, New Testament scholar and bishop in the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, came through here. So I had an opportunity to really get into developing theology that was relevant to the African American experience. Well, while I was here, I also began to experience what it meant to be a female in preparing for leadership in the African American religious community, in the African American church community, and in the larger church community as well. I began to experience some of the attitudes of men that, you as a woman should not be here. You should not be preparing for leadership in the church. Even had a brother told me, a classmate said, Jackie, the problem I have with you is that you might take my job. To which I responded, but I don't want your job. But then if there are some women who are called to the pastoring ministry, and if they have the skills and the talents, then, well, yeah, they ought to have the job. I just don't want that particular job. I don't feel called to that particular ministry. I'm going to move toward doctoral work and further study of theology, which also brings another interesting experience that I had as I was leaving this place after graduation, regalia, back into the registrar's office. One of my classmates came in and asked, "Jackie, what are you going to do next year?" I said, "I'm going to Union Theological Seminary to work on a PhD." The first thing that he said was, "Oh, you're not going to get married, huh?" I said, "Well, that's not what I said. I said I'm going to work on a PhD. I don't think that's going to mean that I'm not going to get married, But the assumption was quite interesting. If you choose the academic route, if you choose further education, then that means that you're choosing not to have a regular family or be a part of a regular family. So it's interesting images that people have of women who make decisions that take them into areas, into disciplines, into vocations, into careers that are not consistent with what patriarchal and racist societies presume that you ought to be doing. I had a very good experience in terms of being the education that I received, but I also experienced some of the attitudes about where you as a female and where you as a black female belongs. Well, I left here, ITC, and I went to New York and to pursue my doctoral work in theology. And I was going there to study with Dr. James Cone. One of the things Dr. Cone said to me after I was accepted, and he was here doing some lectures, the last semester, my last semester here, he came down to do some lectures, and he said, he took me to lunch, and we were talking about what to expect when I get to Union in the fall. And one of the things he said to me, "We don't need another James Cone." I said, "Okay." Well, he said it again, "We don't need another James Cone." What he was saying to me is, my voice is not your voice. You're coming to Union Theological Seminary. Yes, you're going to study with me, but what we're going to need from you is your voice. Very, very liberating. He was not looking for disciples. He was looking for scholars to be able to speak and to speak out of our own context, the context that historically had been violated by ideologies of white supremacy, a context that's been violated by patriarchy, a context that was violated by classism and a lot of other isms that we have been negatively impacted by over the years, over the decades, over the centuries of our presence in these United States. So, One of the first courses that I took was Black Theology, taught by James Cone. And as we, a seminar, and as we went through the syllabus and took our assignments that we were to read for each session, and we were to read the resources and do critical essays upon the resources and bring it back and report to the class, and you're the lead of discussion for the day. Wow, one of the interesting things on the syllabus that caught my interest right away was feminist theology. I said, oh, okay, that's me. So I took feminist theology and looked forward to researching what women were contributing to the theological discussion. And so I was quite excited about the work, about the possibility of doing this work. I had begun to recognize some of the sexism that women experienced in the seminary context, just by some of the attitudes and some of the questions that were raised with me, and I continued to have those experiences when I went to Union Seminary. I was told by one student, you don't belong in my seminary class. You don't belong there. You belong in my kitchen, in my bedroom. And then another seminarian said to me, you talk too much in class, which was a strange comment, because I've always been a quiet person, and most folks who know me will comment on the fact that I'm quite quiet. But we're in class context, and we're listening to these papers, listening to these new ideas that I've not heard before, because we're being taught by people who are in the know, and I'm excited about learning all this good stuff. And so, so I respond to them. I don't think I'm talking too much. I'm responding to this new knowledge. I'm responding to all this this new stuff that I'm experiencing, that I'm reading, and it's fascinating. So you experience it. You experience the sexism at various levels. Then, of course, while I was in New York, I also pursued my interest in ordination. So I'm at Union Seminary with the academics, and then I was in the church in New York with the process, moving through the process of ordination in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. I decided I could have gone through the Palmetto Conference of South Carolina, which is a conference that my father was in, and just because of my father, I could have been protected from some of the sexism, but I decided I didn't want to be flying back and forth just to do what I needed to do, be present, etc. For the ordination process. I decided, I joined the church in New York, and I'm going to just do it in New York, since I'm here in New York. Well, then you begin to experience some of the challenges that women have when they have the audacity to say yes to the call. So I was experiencing, some of that. I was experiencing some good support. There were some men who were very supportive of me, and that was quite affirming. But then there's always, those that are not. And so you hear, some of the questions, their attitudes, and some of the questions that they raise with you, and how they raise the questions with you. So I was experiencing that in the church, and the academic side of it in the seminary. One of the experiences I had in the classes that I was taking in the church process for ordination. The pastor that was teaching pastoral care and counseling, raised the question with the brothers, what do you do when women in the church try to seduce you? So after a couple of the brothers responded to the question, then I raised my hand and I said, well, let's raise the question the other way and deal with what women are to do when they're seduced by the men, and even some of the preacher men. What are we to do? Well, he didn't have an answer for that, but he wanted some discussion on the other side, but he did not want to deal with it from the perspective of women. Well, so I began to experience some of the challenges in the church. And at the same time, I did experience some affirmation. For example, I was working on a PhD in theology, and the dean of the institute that I was studying with was also my pastor, and he just thought it was ridiculous for me, a PhD student in theology, to take a course with somebody else teaching theology, and so he did break the procedure, and he had me to teach theology in that process. Then some of the brothers didn't like that. She's a female, and she has no business, and she's not ordained. She's just in the process, so she has no business teaching. So I had some support. Then I had some of the questions. Well, back on the campus, and in that particular course, Black Theology, that Jim Cone taught, as I began to research my feminist theology, of course, one of the basic tenets of feminist theology is to empower women, and to empower women and women's experiences. Women are not second-class citizens as patriarchy presents them to be. Women are not without culture and without legitimate experiences as patriarchy presents them to be. And so we must first of all affirm women's experiences. All right, I'm with that. Okay, then the second step then is, well, what is women's experience? Or what are women's experiences? Well, it was that question, as I pursued that question, that caused me to raise other questions about women who identify themselves as feminists, and how women's experiences are defined among feminists. It sent me to the point of researching Black women's experiences. I wasn't seeing myself in feminist experience, and so I knew that I needed to investigate Black women's experiences. And so, of course, what that sent me back to slaves, Black women as slaves, so slave narratives, ex-slave narratives, and the experiences that African American women had in the New World, and the experiences that white women, Caucasian women, have in the New World. What was clear is that we were talking about two different experiences. We were talking about the experiences of one group of women who represented, who was daughters. They were daughters of slaveholders, and you had other women who were daughters of slaves. And these were two different experiences. There were two slave narratives that I came across that pointed that out clearly. In one slave narrative or ex-slave narrative, the slave woman, ex-slave woman, was talking about how the mistress of the plantation would regularly sit in her parlor and read the Bible for her and do her devotions, which included reading the Bible. Then there was another slave narrative of the slave woman or ex-slave woman, being ordered beaten by the mistress because the master had raped the slave. And I use the word rape intentionally because even in those situations where there may not have been resistance, it was because black women, the slave woman, had no power to resist. So even if there was no active, fighting, get out of here, it was still rape because there was no basis for consent. You're dealing with power versus powerless. And we know who had the power and we know who didn't. And so I kind of put those two slave narratives, ex-slave narratives together. And I said, well, what could this woman be reading in this Bible, doing her devotion? What could this woman be reading about Jesus, who Jesus is, and what's the meaning of Jesus in our lives? And what she be reading in that Bible say about what's going on outside that window? This black woman being beaten because the master raped her. And I mean, it's clear that we're talking about two different experiences. We're talking about one experience where women are, at least at some level, an empowered group. We recognize that patriarchy existed in white society, and so that compared to white men, there is that there is powerlessness. We understand that patriarchy existed in the white community, existed in the black community as well. So we understand the problem, the inequality that existed between white men and white women. But that relation between white women and black women, that sense of the empowerment of white women and the disempowerment of black women. Mm-hmm. And so that really has defined what I've been doing since that time to this time. You know, what is black women's understandings of women's experiences, and what is white women's understandings of women's experiences. Now, I'm not saying that there are no commonalities between the women. Oh, certainly there are many commonalities. You know, some folks, I have heard the critique of my work, you know, that I focus on differences. Well, you know, but we need to talk about differences. It's the commonalities that keep us talking. Yeah. So there are commonalities between white women and black women. We both experience sexism. And that's a commonality. You know, that's what keep us talking. That's what keep us relating to each other. But it's the differences that are problematic and must be named, because if it were not named, we'd never deal with them. And they have to be dealt with. So I mean that commonality is a part of the interconnectedness, which is a word that I used early in my work. The interconnectedness of black women. We're connected with white women because we all experience sexism. We have that connection with black men in our own community because we all experience racism. The term that's used sometimes these days is intersectionality. Which is the same as my notion of interconnectedness. And so that's what keeps us talking, because we are interconnected. But we have to deal with those elements that threaten that connectedness. And so what's important then is for us to deal with African American women's experiences as reality. Now that's how we got to the point of then, if we are talking about two different experiences, then we're talking about two different names. You know, feminists. You know, there are some black women who still refer to themselves as feminists, but then there are those of us who have adopted the word that Alice Walker brought to us, the memory that she brought to all of us, womanism, coming from that word that most black women are familiar with, womanish, being accused of being said that you womanish is really a kind of a negative labeling, you know, because you're not supposed to be womanish. Umanish is how it is pronounced in the vernacular. You know, that's a matter of, you know, trying to be grown before your time. You know, trying to act like a woman when you're just a girl. You know, so we're familiar with that word, but what she did was she turned it upside down. She just turned it over. And you know, we're accustomed to turning things over. I mean, you know, black used to be a negative term in our society. You're called black. You know, that's the worst thing somebody can call you. You know, your black self. You know, you so black. You know, that the color symbolism in our society, in our church and society, is so strong and so negative that black was such a negative reality that there were fighting terms. You know, you get called black, then you put up your dukes. Well, what black community did was take that which was historically used against it and turn it upside down. and made it a positive reality. Yeah, we're Black Americans. You know, we Afro American, African Americans. But we're Black, and we made it positive. So what Alice Walker did was took a quasi-negative term and turned it upside down, and made it a positive reality. Women who are courageous, have a history of being courageous, audacious, bodacious. Women who know more than they are giving credit for knowing. Is that what sociologists used to call some time ago? Used to call that strong Black woman tradition. In the church we used to say Black women who can make a way out of no way. There's an artist that I interviewed once. A group of artists. I interviewed some of the artists in another project that I'm working on. Said that Black women who can hold the sky up with the broomstick. That strong Black woman tradition. Black women. Cheryl Townsend Jilk says can hold the ocean back with the broom. That strong Black woman tradition. That's the womanist, and so we adopted that word as one that describes the Black women's experience, and it's a word that brings meaning to us as African American women. And it does not mean that that we're not feminism. At many points, we interconnect in many ways. But what it means is that we must affirm the reality of Black womanhood, and that. We must affirm the positive experiences of what it means to be Black and female. What drove and what drives me to keep going in spite of much resistance that comes from a variety of places. Well, it's my sense of call. It's my sense of my call. Someone said about me. She advocates the equality of women and the need for women to be in positions of leadership, positions that she does not desire herself. And that is so true. My work in the church has been about elevating the leadership of women, because I think that women are called to be leaders in the church, and we must affirm egalitarianism. And as men are affirmed as leaders, women must be concerned. Be concerned about leadership. So I've fought over the years for women to be elected as bishop, for example. I had one fellow to tell me, "Now, Jackie, you'd make a good bishop." To which I responded, "Well, that's not my calling." But those women who do feel that they are called to that office, they need to be elected. They need to serve in those offices. I saw my job as doing a liberating theology that calls for that kind of practice, liberating practice. But I never felt called to that position myself. But black women who are called need to serve in those positions. Why? Because it's right. Why? Because women are duly qualified and provide and possess the leadership skills, and they then ought to serve in these positions. So, in my church, I started the organization, the AME Women in Ministry, which for many years was doing advocacy work for the advancement of women. And over the last 3-4 decades, we have seen some progress of women in the church, beginning with more and more women being appointed senior pastors of what I call non-traditional churches for women, because the church they used to appoint women to would most often be very small churches, 4 or 5, literally 10-member churches, the churches that the brothers don't want. But as we were providing this advocacy ministry, over the years, women's appointments have changed, and women have been appointed in the mid-judicatory position of the churches. That is, you have the pastor, you got bishop, but between the two, you have presiding elders. In the Black Methodist churches, in the United Methodist Church, they call them district DSs, district superintendents, that the mid-judicatories. So we have more women in those positions, and it was in the year 2000, that we elected the first female bishop in the AME Church, and then in 2004, 2 more were elected, and in 2012, another female was elected, and then we had a female elected as a general officer in the church, one of the officers that does the managing of different offices of the church. The historiographer was a female elected. So there has been progress over the years, but we're still not liberated. I mean, you know that stained glass ceiling is still there. It's been cracked, but it's still up there. So the struggle continues, and the work of womanists, and the work of feminists, and the work of other women of color, Mujerista, women, Hispanic feminists, and Asian feminists. The work is still there, because liberation is still not a reality yet.
All right.
Well, what about the future of womanist theology? We're still young. We're still very young in the theological world in terms of doing constructive theology. Patriarchs have had centuries of work done, and even some of those who fall under other perspectives of liberation theology have been on the scene longer, and so we're still have much development to do. And there seems to be a good cadre of women who are in the different areas, in the different fields, in the different areas of study, down, so that we're getting voices in a variety of fields. When I came along, there were I mean, we could count them. Dolores Williams, Katie Cannon, and I were at Union together, and later on others came. And we could have a good stream of black women who are entering the various fields, and so we just need to continue that. And what we need, what still is needed is support for these women. Women do not have sufficient finances that's required for taking this significant time out of their lives to study theology or ethics or church history, and we have need in all of these disciplines. So I mean, the future is for us to keep bringing them in, so that we can develop in all of these disciplines, all of these areas.
With that kind of future, pitfalls or fears you have for the kind of future of womanist theology?
Well, the pitfalls would probably be those who are still challenging the need for womanist theology. I mean, there are those in the African American community who see it as divisive. There are those in the feminist community that see it as divisive. There are some feminists who don't see the need for a womanist theology or a mujerista theology, but they only see the need for feminist theology. I think they're not reading the times, and they're not taking seriously the arguments. They're not taking seriously the experiences of those women who are not dominant culture women. So we just have to keep at it, keep going, until more and more doors are open, more permanently. And it's not one of these things where you being treated as a fad. Oh, just wait, it'll go away. But if these women keep coming and we keep developing them and sending them to the proper programs, etc., so that they can be duly trained, then I think that would kind of mitigate against the pitfalls.
When you look back at your kind of academic career thus far, is there a moment that's
that's interesting. Well, I mean, I don't. While here at ITC, we've been able to develop a variety of programs that have impacted women and men, actually, in very good and positive ways. As director of Black Women in Church and Society, I've been able to impact not only women students and women clergy in the community by way of funded programs, Black Women in Ministry, in Community Service Ministry, Black Women's Leadership Programs, Black Women Ministerial Leadership, where we impacted the actual lives of women. The actual reason for my what's going on out there? Yeah, looking for somebody or what? When I developed Black Women in Church and Society, it was for the purpose of addressing the issues, concerns of Black women in the church and Black women in ministry in particular. Doors of the churches were not open; they were slightly ajar, and they're still not wide open. They're a little more over the last 3 decades or so. It's been open a little more, but it's still not totally open. And so we started developing programs designed to provide women graduates with skills in other areas, community service ministries, that would give them some additional marketable skills when they leave this institution, since those doors are not fully open yet. So we impacted the lives of women seminarians and women in early ministries in the churches away from campus. And then we had another program called the Woman Scholars Program, where we for 13 or so years, we brought about 26 women to campus to do research and writing, only to teach one course, but their primary the program was primarily designed to provide sabbatical time for women doing work on Black women, religion, and spirituality. And so we've been able to impact women across the world, actually, because the program was international. We had a scholar from Jamaica, West Indies, and we had a biblical scholar from South Africa. And we accepted an Aboriginal from Australia, but she chose to go to India instead. So through that program, we were able to impact women in a variety of disciplines. It was interdisciplinary across the country, across the world. The work of BWCS has been significant in impacting women in the practice of ministry and women in the ministry of scholarship.
I had one last question.
Yeah.
Were you gonna?
Nope. I was thinking because of the.
To be the assistant teacher or teaching assistant for feminist and womanist theologies class in the fall, and so a lot of the students were reading some of this work, and particularly we read some excerpts from White Women's Christ and Black Women's Jesus, and a lot of, especially some women of color and Black women, it was the first time reading your work, and they were just like completely, I don't know, really floored. And a lot of students throughout that class were just having these awakening moments. And so I was wondering, like, what would you pass on, like if you were teaching that class, or if you were, like, what would you say to students engaging your work for the first time or feeling like these awakening moments reading it?
Be open. Interestingly, the book White Woman's Christ, Black Woman and Black Woman's Jesus is being republished, and it's also being published in Portuguese as well. So it'd be interesting to get some international responses to the work as well. I look forward to that engagement. But I would suggest that anybody reading the work come to it with an open mind, and it sounds like it might be something else, might be military show or something going on. Yeah, because it doesn't sound like a helicopter. The police would have been a helicopter. I would hope that people reading the work would come to it with an open mind, ready to engage the material, ready to be challenged, and ready to learn and experience, to learn issues that they may not have thought about. I never thought about it this way. I hope folks would be able to see themselves in the reading of the various perspectives shared in that work, and that they could approach it with some honesty and some willingness to change when and where change is needed.
That's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being willing, especially to come in. Next time, yes, we'll need to remember that we can always offer to come to people's places.
Yeah.
Some things. So we moved a couple things, so we'll make sure to put everything back.
And you didn't have anything else you wanted to say? You feel like you got it all?
I got it.
All right.